This former Fortune 500 CEO and consultant to CBS for several primetime television specials has uncovered new scientific evidence proving the accuracy of the Bible. Next on this edition of It's Supernatural.
Centuries have come and gone, offering wisdom and understanding throughout the ages. Today there should be nothing beyond one's power to discover, and yet the strange, unusual, and mysterious world of the supernatural defies understanding. Stay tuned for a unique and powerful investigation into a curious, undiscovered universe only on It's Supernatural.
Hello, I'm Sid Roth, your investigative reporter. I'm here with Chuck Missler, and I've so been looking forward to this interview because, you see, Chuck is a very successful businessman. He's been CEO of Fortune 500 companies, and he's so knowledgeable about the new data that is available today that conclusively, absolutely proves that we can trust the Bible. Chuck, why can we trust the Bible?
Well, that's a big subject. There's many reasons. I think the first discovery, there's two discoveries in our way of thinking that will make this clear. The first discovery is that we have here 66 books that were penned by over 40 different guys over thousands of years, and yet we now discover it evidences a deliberate design from end to end. And I don't mean just in theme. We discover that every number, every letter, every place name appears to be deliberately in place by deliberate, skillful design. But the second discovery, for the first discovery is the integrity of the whole, which is startling. But the second discovery is that it has to do with its origin. See, let me back up a little bit, Sid. We all assume that time is linear and absolute. And we do that because
that's what we live in, type of situation.
And in school, the teacher wrote a line on the blackboard from left to right. The left end was the birth of somebody, the founding of an empire or whatever, and the right end was the end of that person or empire. So we tend, from that experience, to think that time is linear and absolute. From that background, when we start talking about eternity or God, we tend to imagine someone who has lots of time. We tend to think of eternity as a line that starts at infinity on the left and goes to infinity on the right. That God is simply someone who has lots of time. Well, that's poetic and it's useful in our songs and things, but it's bad physics. Because we know from Einstein's theory of relativity that time is a physical property. Time varies with mass, acceleration, or gravity. Now, is God subject to gravity? Of course not. So God is not somebody who has lots of time. God is somebody that dwells outside the restrictions of the physical world.
That'd be a great realm to dwell in.
Exactly. Well, the point is, if God has the technology to create us in the first place, he has the technology to get a message to us. But how does he authenticate the message? How does he let us know that the message is really from him and not some kind of contrivance or a fraud of some kind? One way, probably there's many answers to that, and we'll talk about a few, but one of the answers is to demonstrate that the origin of his message is from outside time. That's what Isaiah means when he says it is he that inhabiteth eternity.
Okay, so how does he demonstrate this?
By writing history before it happens. He declares that he alone knows the end from the beginning. Let me use an analogy to get this across. Let's assume we're watching a major parade. We're sitting on the curb, and around the corner comes the marching units, the bands, whatever. For us, sitting at that curb, the parade is a sequence of events. But to someone who's outside the plane of that existence, say in the chopper above, they could see the beginning and the end simultaneously.
Of course.
And that's exactly the position God is.
But Chuck, a lot of skeptics say the predictions or the prophecies in the Bible are so general that of course they come true. They're not that specific. How would you respond?
They are shockingly, astonishingly specific.
Give me an example.
Well, the most interesting ones tend to get a little technical. But let me give you a simple...
they're that specific that they're too technical sometimes.
Well, exactly. But let me give you a simple one that people may find provocative. This is a more subtle thing, but at the same time I think it'll be provocative. And that's the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you read the book of Genesis, the first few chapters are kind of interesting. You got the creation, you got the whole incident in the garden and all of that. That's straightforward. But we get to and from chapter 6 on, you've got the flood of Noah and all that. But chapter 5 is one of those chapters that we tend to skip over because it's a genealogy of 10 people.
It's got a lot of names, right?
Just names. And we have 10 people there from Adam. It's basically the genealogy from Adam to Noah. And when we read that in the English Bible, we stumble in a sense because the names are not translated. We don't translate names. My formal name, they call me Chuck, but I'm Charles. What does Charles mean? Different people have different opinions. No one knows what that means. Well, in the Hebrew, though, you can infer the meaning of the names because of the roots.
Yes.
So let's just go through a few of these, okay? Adam is pretty straightforward. That's man, right? Adamah,
right.
Man, okay. He had a son by the name of Seth. And what does Seth imply? It's a root that implies appointed. We get a clue from that from the previous chapter. When Eve gave birth to Seth, she felt he was appointed to be a replacement for Abel, whom Cain slew. So the word Seth suggests appointed. When Seth has a son, his name is Enosh, which comes from Anash. It's an incurable wound or woe or grief or whatever. It means mortal, in effect. Enosh has a son by the name of Canaan. Some English Bibles have it misappropriated in Canaan. No, it's Kenan. In fact, Balaam does a pun on the Kenites in Numbers 24. It really means sorrow. We go on. Now, those two guys probably had a belly full of these horrible names, mortal and sorrow. So when Kenan had a son, he named him Mahalalel. Mahalal is the blessed or praised one. El is the name for God.
So what you're doing, though, is, if I'm understanding you right, is you're taking the names in Genesis in order
and looking at the Hebrew roots, what they imply.
What they imply. So we have 10 names.
10 names.
And when we find out what each one of these 10 mean,
it's an exploration. Let's see what they say.
Okay.
And Mahalalel has a son by the name of Yared. And Yared has which means it's a verb. Yarad shall come down. And we have Enoch, which is an academic term, meaning commencement or teaching. Now, Enoch's perhaps one of the more interesting ones. I should back up. Most people don't realize that the flood of Noah did not come as a surprise. It was preached on for 4 generations. But what we learn about Enoch is when he was 65, something very strange happened, because from that day on, it says he walked with God, whatever that means.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Enoch apparently had a prophecy that as long as his son that was just born would live, the judgment of the flood would be withheld. So he named him after 2 Hebrew roots, Muth, which means his death, and from a derivative of the verb shalach, which shall bring. The name Methuselah actually means his death shall bring. It's suggestive of that prophecy that was given when he was born.
So we have a sentence now by those names.
It's coming. I got a couple more, and then we'll look at it. Methuselah's son was Lamech. Now here's a root that we use in English, lament. And so, it means despairing. And Lamech has a son by the name of Noah. We've all heard of Noah, but his name comes from Noach, which means comfort. In fact, Lamech tells us that. He says he tells us why he named him Noah. He says, the same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands and so forth. So now we have these names, and if we read them in English, they're meaningless to us. Adam, Seth, Enosh, and so forth.
Of course.
Let's read them with the English implications of the roots, as I just said. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest.
That is so good that, Chuck, I want you to say that one more time. Each of those 10 names, their actual meaning put together forms a sentence and says,
man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort.
Now, I don't say that is so.